Tune into the most fun and exciting new radio show on the Gulf Coast. It's The Inside Drive with Ryan Mulvey. From the Bill Kramer Chevrolet Buick GMC and Kramer Marine Outdoor Studios on ESPN Northwest Florida.
And welcome back. You're listening to The Inside Drive live here on ESPN Northwest Florida. On the line with DFS expert Keith Fleming, and we're about to jump into the NFC Championship title game, previewing the game and giving the official showdown lineup. But before we dive into it, I just want to preface it by saying if it was any other team playing the Lions besides the Niners, I would be pulling for the Lions because I think it's a fantastic story. They were just a few years ago, didn't win a game. They were 4-12, and all of a sudden here they are back in the NFC title game. And things were a lot different in this world the last time the Lions were in the NFC Championship. So again, if any other team besides the Niners, I'd definitely be pulling for the Lions. But since the Niners are back in the NFC Championship game for Brock's second consecutive year, only getting to the biggest game in your conference, let's dive right into it, Keith.
Yeah, and I just, for the record, want to say I've heard a lot of people asking, why is this game the later game of the two? They flip that every year.
Yeah.
So that's why this game is second, even though probably more people are excited probably for the Chiefs-Ravens game. I also want to say just kudos to the media who was banging the Detroit Lions preseason, right, to the point where I was like, okay, let's slow down a little bit. It's the Detroit Lions, and to Detroit's credit, they've lived up to all of the hype. They should be very excited. Again, the Lions are at an NFC title game since the first time since I was in elementary school. That pretty much tells you all you need to know. It's the guy who's just reached, 4 decades.
Yeah.
But for a litany of reasons, I got a lot of concern for Lions fans. Obviously, my buddies, the other DFS crew from Fantasy Six Pack, the DFS Den, Dave Eddy and Chris Robin, both lifelong Lions fans. I've been so excited for them this year, but it's going to be tough for them to win this match. This is a really bad matchup for the Lions, who have been a much different team at home compared to on the road. And I think it's not going out on a limb to say that the favorites both win this weekend. But I will say I would be way more shocked if the Lions pulled this upset than I would if Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs go into, Baltimore and beat this Ravens team that has just been so good by every metric that you look at. I also think it's fair to say the Lions are the second best team in the NFC this year, especially when you think about how they lost to the Cowboys, who then got boat raced by the Green Bay Packers in the playoffs. But again, this is a really bad matchup, and I think a horrible time for this Lions team to be playing the Niners, because San Francisco, let's just be honest, they were lucky last week to win that game versus Green Bay. It was not their best game by any means. The weather did not help them. Has Purdy played in a rain game before that?
Yeah,
Brian?
the Browns game, if you remember that one, where he got them back down into field goal range, and then Moody missed that kick. But yeah, the weather this Sunday, 73 degrees, 6% chance of rain, winds a very light 5 miles an hour.
Yeah, so I don't think that's going to be a problem, which obviously it was a problem. He was bothered. You can tell by the fact
I've never
that he
seen
had
a
glove,
quarterback
reset
get the ball in the snap, hold it with his other hand, wipe his hand off on his pants, and then I've never seen that in the NFL before. You could tell he was struggling.
I love the confidence of him, though, that he felt like I can do that and I'm okay. That's a lot of belief in your O-line. The point is they played a really bad game, but most importantly, they survived, which we know is so huge for teams trying to win a Super Bowl. And to me, even more important, both the offense and defense stepped up when it mattered the most.
Yep.
The Niners, 3 trips by the Packers into the red zone. They only get 6 points. By the Packers in the red zone, only give up 6 points. Brock when he first made that throw to Jennings over the middle, I was like, oh, my God, he just lost the game. That was such a perfect pass. I'm so glad we get so many different angles of these things now.
He got creamed on that play, too.
Hammered. And he stood it and made a perfect throw. And I just don't see the Niners playing that poorly again, maybe unless it rains, which, as you pointed out, that's not going to be the case. And this is just a huge mismatch with the Lions secondary versus the 49ers passing game. Shanahan is as good as any coach in the league of scheming how to exploit a team's defensive weakness. And with or without Debo, I don't think it's going to matter, because you know who has by far the best wide receiver versus any cornerback matchup this week? I'm talking about by far, is Brandon Ayuk. You know who has by far the best tight end matchup versus any defender? It's George Kittle. Only Lamar Jackson has a better rating for this matchup per PFF than Brock Purdy, and it's very simple. The Lions, since their bye, have ran man at nearly 40% of the time. That's been going on 8 games. The good news is they've been the number 1 run defense in the league since they made that adjustment. The bad news is they give up a ton of passing yards. And if you look in these games, if the defense either doesn't bend but doesn't break in the red zone, or they just outscore their opponent, they've had real issues, especially with these big, athletic, physical wide receivers, i.e. Brandon Ayuk, Puka Nacua, and Mike Evans. The first 2 weeks of the playoffs just feasted against this Lions defense. 17 receptions for 328 yards and 2 touchdowns, and what's most damning, on just 22 targets. They've also struggled with tight ends, especially as of late, allowing 50-plus receiving yards in 4 of their last 6. In their last 3 games, Johnny Munt, who's that? I don't really know, and Cade Otton combined for 10 catches for 118 yards. Cade Otton is a good tight end. Johnny Munt was a great story. He's a 29-year-old who came out of nowhere and won us some DFS money at the end of the year, but they ain't George Kittle's. The only way I see the Lions winning this game is they're going to need to effectively run the ball. The man concept, though, that they run on the O-line is going to be tested big time versus this 49ers pass rush on that defensive line. There have been a few teams that have had success running on the Niners recently. Obviously, we saw the Packers last week, 130 yards at 5 yards per carry. The Cardinals in Week 15 rushing for 238 at 7 yards per carry. The issue in both of those games, the Niners still won both of them. The Bengals would be the blueprint for this Detroit Lions if they want to win from earlier this season, where they rushed for 130 yards at 5 yards per carry, and Burrow was just surgical, 28 of 32 for 283 and 3 touchdowns. And I do want to say, though, there was a caveat in that game as well, because Purdy was playing mere days after suffering a concussion, and he looked every bit the player playing 5 days after suffering a concussion. I mean, it's not impossible, because Goff has been outstanding in the postseason. He deserves all the credit in the world. 52 of 69 for 564, 3 touchdowns, 0 picks. Now, granted, he tried to give a couple interceptions the defense just wouldn't take. And then Jamar Gibbs is, to me, the X factor for this Lions team, as he scored a rushing touchdown in both games of the playoffs. And he looks like the better option at running back, but he's only had 25 total touches in 2 games for 181 yards. That's 7.24 yards per touch. If the Lions want to win, I think they're going to have to use more of Gibbs. I don't see Montgomery get much sledding against this really good Niners run defense, to where Gibbs at least can get outside, make it more difficult, and also will be more effective in the passing game. But the issue is going to be, we know Shanahan is as good in, yes, there is, of scheming up it's like the first 2 drives, right, Ryan, that he always schemes out, and they just go by that no matter what.
Yep,
and then
they run
get
the
into
script, yeah, absolutely.
I have a bad feeling that you're going to see this Lions secondary get torched right off the bat, and I expect at least one big play from both Kittle and Ayuk on those 2 drives. Having said that, my single-game showdown lineup for this, to me, the captain has to be Brock Purdy. He is by far the best value at QB this week, has by far the best matchup. Now, that'll cost you $15K, but that's okay. I'm going to, obviously, again, double stack him, and you're going to hear this in my 2-game slate as well, with Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle. They're 8,600 and 6,800. I'm going to throw the Niners D in at 4,200 because Goff has been known on the road to make mistakes and turn the ball over, especially if they're playing from behind. So I want to round out the lineup because I think the Niners are going to win this game relatively easily. That means you're going to see a lot of Goff passes. So I'm going with 2 wide receivers and Josh Reynolds at 4,400 for the Detroit Lions and Amon-Ra St. Brown for 1,100. Full discretion, I am not nearly as good in showdown lineups as I am in these multi-game slates. So take with that what you will. I also think there's a lot of luck in those involved to where, again, even in a 4-team slate, you can get a real leg up. Do you want me to just go right into the cash game lineup?
Yeah, just real quick on that showdown. To kind of justify what you're saying there a little bit. You've got to. It's not guess, but the team that wins the game. You have to have those players more in your lineup than the other team. It's just how the nature of those showdown lineup matchups go, and that's why Liam was able to have some success throughout the year doing showdowns because he'd always go heavy on the Niners. Obviously, the Niners I think lost 4 games this season, and
wasn't a bad philosophy.
No, so you've got to have that happen. So if the Lions were to come out and absolutely destroy the Niners, then you're committing to kind of one side or the other. But by being able to take the Niners D and Josh Reynolds, you're getting Amon-Ra St. Brown in there because I agree with you too. I think Jared Goff's gonna make some mistakes. He's thrown I think 5 interceptions in his last 4 road games or something close to that. Don't quote me on that, but he's just known to make some mistakes. And the Niners, I think, are top 3 in the league in interceptions, and they added 2 more last week in the divisional round. So I like the Niners D as that play in there to kind of allow you to do the Ayuks and the Amon-Ra St. Browns. But yeah, go ahead, jump right into that 2-game slate on the. It's our last opportunity in NFL football to have a multi-game slate until September.
2 other things real quick on the single game.